it hasn't been easy, and it's been a reinvention every fucking time. And my feeling towards myself around that has always been just try to be as forgiving with my mistakes as I can be, and learn from them, and then just continue to move forward through the doubt, through the lack of security or being sure about anything, and just keep looking inside and finding that place where that is the source.
Today's unreasonable human has lived a multi-dimensional expression of her immense creativity. She was a national gymnastics champion, a performer for Cirque Du Soleil, and has gone on to become an extraordinary creator in the dancing, aerial, and spiritual realms. Her name is Bianca Sapetto. Hi, Bianca.
Hi, Erica.
How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
You too. I think it's really hard for me to not show in my voice when I'm speaking to somebody that is a very good friend of mine.
Yeah,
I've noticed that.
That makes sense.
It makes sense. I always end up going a little bit higher in my volume, like I get excited. So I'm trying my best not to do that right now, but I can't. So I'm going to so we're just going to go with this.
It's unreasonable, but
it's unreasonable, but it is. But yeah, so thank you so much for joining me on my show. I am really loving having conversations with the humans that I have encountered in this life because, wow, people are incredible. And, you know, you're one of those people. So when I started the show, I was like, I have to speak to Bianca because you've had such an extraordinary life and career. I don't know if I'd call it a career, though. So I'd like to get more into this with you. And I'd like to start at the beginning of what would become a stellar career as a performing artist. So can we go right back to the beginning, which for me, I'm thinking it might be your gymnastics, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me too, Erica. I have to say it's you're one of my favorite people in the world to talk to, and I'm just honored to be here and honored to have you in my life.
Thank you.
So in terms of my career or my vocation, maybe we can call it.
Yes, that's a great name
because it
for
definitely feels more than a career, and it's intertwined with my identity and my being and my karma and my past lives and all the things. I did begin. I began. Let me actually back up a little bit before my gymnastic career, and say that as a child I was really obsessed with learning to fly, and I believed in a multi-dimensional universe, and I believed that I could fly, and I believed that there were portals that existed in the world, and all I had to do was be able to access them, and I could live in a different dimension or access a different dimension or walk in between the worlds, so to speak. This was something that who knows how it came about in my imagination, but it was very strong and very clear for me when I was young. And some of my earliest childhood memories are jumping into, I grew up in Southern California and I grew up in the beaches, and I was very blessed to have a very strong relationship with the ocean and the coast. And one of those portals that was so obvious to me were the tide pools. So I would jump into these pools of water, and if it didn't quite work the way I thought it might work in my imagination, then it became a system of belief. Like if I just believe enough, if I just have if I can manifest this other dimension, if I can create it in my imagination, and then it can become the reality that I'm physically in. And the same thing with flying. It was something I just had to be able to access. It was something that I felt was innate, was something that we could do as human beings, but it was just, I just had to figure it out how to do it. So that led to a lot of jumping into dangerous tide pools at times, or and jumping off of lifeguard stations and jumping off of roofs, and it got my parents very concerned.
I'm sure.
Yeah, so they put me into gymnastics because they felt like as long as she can maybe learn how to fall and get strong enough to maybe, and they put me into swim lessons as well, navigate the oceans, and she'll probably survive this, whatever she's going through.
Well, how old were you at the time?
I was 5 when they put me in gymnastics.
That's
so
incredible.
Quite young.
Yeah.
And before that, I was in dance classes. I connected with music very physically at a young age. So dance felt like a natural choice for my parents to give me something that I might be interested in doing. Swimming, and also, growing up in the ocean, it was really important to have those just life skills.
Yeah.
Survival skills. And I think, that imprinting at such young age, it just became my way of living. I still believe in a multidimensional universe that we have access to. Now I do it differently through art and meditation, pranayama techniques. I've done it with psychedelics as well. It's another portal to these different dimensions. And performance has always felt like that to me, as a way to access the different aspects of self, or the different aspects of existence, and to share it with other people. And pull them into that suspension of disbelief so that we can live in this different place for a while together. And then how does that then inform the rest of your life?
Yeah.
It may not. But if it gets you questioning, or it gives you an experience that you walk away from that made you feel something, then that's what I feel is successful in terms of being a performing artist and choreographer and director.
So when you went into gymnastics, I mean, for you were just trying to find other portals, and you were just trying to fly. That's what you really wanted to do, because you believed that in your heart, and your parents did the logical, realistic thing. Okay, let's do something safe. Let's do gymnastics. And then how did that translate for you? Because you ended up having a really incredible gymnastics career. So how did it relate? How did gymnastics feed that for you?
Yeah. Thank you for that compliment. I think I had a natural aptitude for physicality that was just a coincidence in terms of how that connected to my imagination, or not necessarily a coincidence, but the those two things brought together. It was how karmically I manifested into being a performing artist, as opposed to a visual artist or a musician or whatever else. Or a physicist, I don't know. But I was also a very driven child. I think that there was the aspect of, for example, competition in gymnastics was always a double-edged sword for me, because I hated competing. I hated the idea of being pit against somebody else, because it felt like in order to win a medal or a position or a certain point, the perfect 10 or whatever. But I hated that aspect of it. It doesn't resonate with my spirit, because it felt like I was a performer in my spirit, but I was also competitive with myself. So I was very driven with towards achieving the best that I could be, and was paired with coaches who helped me to achieve those goals that we would set for ourselves. But when I look at my own children, or I look at other children that I know now, and gosh, we learn so much, don't we, about being parents, about our own childhoods, and our perspectives of the world back then, and our perspectives of the world now, and through the eyes of children that we come into contact with. But it was a double-edged sword for me, because I loved that. I loved being pushed beyond what I think I thought I could achieve or imagined I could achieve, and I didn't like being pitted against other girls, girls, specifically in my sport, who I would rather be friends with, and collaborative with. There was a short period in my career as a gymnast where I did something called group routine. And I was a rhythmic gymnast, by the way, for your listeners who don't know. Rhythmic gymnastics is a sport that is under the Olympic sport that is under the umbrella of the United States Gymnastics Federation, or the the International Gymnastics Federation. And underneath that umbrella, there is rhythmic gymnastics, which was my sport, with the ribbon and the ball and the hoop and the clips and the rope. And then there is artistic gymnastics, which is the bars and the beam and the tumbling. And then there is men's gymnastics, and there is acro. And so these are all different sports, but they're all under the umbrella of what we call gymnastics. So my sport specifically was rhythmic gymnastics. And and it's true. I mean, I was a 5-time national champion. I competed for all over the world for the United States. I won my first national championships when I was 8 years old. And I did, and so I did have success in that. But one of my favorite, slivers of career in that was when I was in a group number. And the group number was six gymnasts who were competing together in one routine. And it was so fun and creative and expressive. And it was something where we could just figure out how to do all this cool shit together and then perform it in front of people. But of course, the performance, what could have been thought of, what felt like it could have been performance, was always under the sort of, for me at least, it felt like a bit of the oppressive structure of competition, where we were being criticized and judged for every single movement, every single flick of the wrist, every single movement of the foot, everything was graded by a point system. And talk about being put under a microscope, and then that happening as a young girl going through puberty. And that is a recipe for therapy later in life.
I'm sure, but it's interesting because it was probably the seed, because I can totally see why you were a rhythmic gymnast, because it's so creative and it's just such a beautiful leg of gymnastics. It was my favorite. It's always been my favorite to watch, because it is so creative. Yeah, it's just so creative and so beautiful. And so I can understand how you could really transport your body into this other sort of dimension, another world through your rhythmic gymnastics. But then I also see how it's almost like that seed was planted when you did that group number. There was the seed that was planted of the possibilities that later took you into your career, right? Yes,
it did. And I think I had these, one of the things that I was really driven to always be the best I could be on a personal level. But I think the seeds that as you say, that were planted was a huge part of what kept me in the sport. Just that feeling of freedom, when you hone an instrument to such a degree that you can get as close as you can to pure expression. And that instrument was my body, just as any dancer as yourself would understands.
Yeah, but I think also there's something in you though that is so. It's almost, there's something, and I believe we all have it in us. It's just that what is it that change takes, like what is it that differentiates people from each other? Because you took it upon yourself. You wanted to be homeschooled. You took it upon yourself to take this this gymnastics career that you had very seriously. Your parents didn't decide that for you. You decided it for you. So what is the thing that you think differentiates you from people who are like, oh, I'm just going to dance after school? And, what was that? Was it just...
Yeah. I'll be totally honest. I don't know, but I can't put a finger on it exactly. A lot, I was highly driven. I was the same in school. I mean, I was one of those students who had like a 4.2 or whatever. I don't even remember grade point average. And even though there was a period in high school where I did home study, and actually most of my high school I was in home study or some variation on home study plus a little bit of going into school. That feeling of achieving a goal always felt very, I took it very seriously. But also it felt natural. It just felt a part of who I was. And there were a few times where my parents, because there were glamorous times as a gymnast, traveling all over the world, interviews, being on television, magazines and the press, and what it might be considered glamorous, going to different countries and competing for the U.S., representing the U.S., and being asked for autographs and whatnot. And sure, there's definitely this idea of the glamour of that, but the day-to-day is really not that. The day-to-day is working really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want that for my children, for example. Like, unless they really wanted it, I wouldn't. I wouldn't want that for my kids. But my parents did ask me a few times if this is really what I wanted to do, and I just wanted to keep going deeper and deeper.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like when you have a calling, it's like it's a calling in you. It's something that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to other people. And for you now, you look back and you think, oh my God, I would never do this to my kids. But yet, when you were in it, it was something you had to do. Yeah,
and in a way, it felt. I mean, of course, I had a choice, but it didn't even really totally feel like that. It just felt like a vocation, like a part of my path. That it was really clear that was my path that I was on. And there's not really a rationale or a logic behind it. Like if I try to tear that, like try to pull that apart and dissect it and study it, none of the pieces make sense. Like why I would, because it was also, a lot of it, as glamorous as it was highly toxic. That environment was, I mean, you see now we see more because of all the more recent press that's been out, that and the exposing of the abuses of the gymnastic sport, the machine that is competitive and elite competitive gymnastics. I was a part of that. That was my childhood. That was my upbringing. And it was something at the time that was endured because it was something that led towards my goal. And that sort of imprinting of enduring abuse reflected later on in my career as a performing artist. Because as we see, for example, through the Me Too movement, there's a lot of stuff that women have to go through in most career, any career really, but as a performing artist, where there's so much emphasis on your appearance and how you look and your body and what you have on or don't have on, there's also a lot of men who take advantage of that. And so like navigating that as a woman, I think I did a lot of growing in as I kind of transitioned from being a gymnast, an athlete, into being an artist, that transition was exceptionally important for me. And it was like Inanna, descending into the underworld. It was definitely a Persephone thing where I had to go down and find myself, the truth of myself, and come back up and bring that into the world, because in order to be an athlete at that level, you're doing a lot of a bearing of emotions, bearing of your feelings. There's a lot that you have to be able to disassociate or put aside in order to endure endure 10 hours of practice.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Let's get into where that transition. So how old were you when you finished your gymnastics career and started moving into other?
So I was 16, 17 when I transitioned out of the sport. And so I did my senior year of high school in high school. So I went back to high school for that senior year, and I felt completely like an alien, because I think I had like one or two friends, and they were, the freaks at the school, and I went to a Catholic school, and I'd gone to religious school since I was in fourth grade. And so that was the other system that I was growing up in that was a little bit oppressive, was the Catholic Church. And I'm obviously joking, being sarcastic when I say a little bit oppressive, but so all those things together were kind of like a pressure cooker for me, and it was like the coal being compressed, and I knew there was a diamond in there, but it was deep. It was really deep, and I had to dig pretty deep to find that. And it was during my senior year that I kind of did a lot of experimentation with boundaries, with who I am and identity. If I'm not a rhythmic gymnast, who the fuck am I?
Yeah.
Like my whole identity was around being this sort of, this world-class athlete and Olympic level athlete. So who am I if I'm not that? And that was a major transition for me. I did have the support of some mentors, which I feel so grateful for. And one of them, her name is Michelle Berube, and she was a dancer with Michael Jackson. And among many other wonderful, she had artists, and she, this was everything we know about Michael Jackson, obviously, now. And he was still, he at that time was at the top of the height of the pop world. So she had been a rhythmic gymnast, and she sort of pulled me aside and took me under her wing and said, look at this world that exists outside of competition. And you are this incredible instrument. And I have these opportunities where you can let that instrument shine. And so I really credit her with just, that awakening into the rest of the world, that next dimension of existence. And the opportunities that she afforded me. We were doing, one of the first things that she brought me into was it was my first gig with the circus, and I was 16. And there was called the LA Circus, and it was a local circus that sort of traveled around, and we would pitch up a tent on the weekends in different parks all around Los Angeles. And we had a single point where we could hang a trapeze, and that's where I met some clowns and aerial acrobats and contortionists, and we had a rhythmic gymnastic number. We were a quartet. And we dressed all in white, and we had this beautiful, she picked athletes who were fresh out of sport, and she also was recently retired. So, but she was just a generation above us. So she had had all this experience. She was probably at the time in her early 20s, but she felt, like so experienced to me.
I can imagine. Yeah.
And we did gigs with the LA Circus, and she also, at the time in Los Angeles, it was LA, so there were opportunities. And there was a nightclub that Prince was opening called Glam Slam, and it was downtown. And so we performed on the weekends at Glam Slam. And there was a sort of choreographers balls where different choreographers from Los Angeles would come in, and he would come in, and we would do these performances of all different kinds of dance. And that was another crazy world opener for me, just to see all the different styles. So then we had our circus gigs and we had our Glam Slam gigs. And then I got a job with SeaWorld, and that was through Valerie Kondos, who is a very beloved coach at UCLA, still is. And that led to Valerie gave my name to Cirque du Soleil. Cirque du Soleil also knew about me because of they keep tabs basically on the elite gymnasts and different sports, especially back then. I know they did. I'm sure they probably still do. And so I was in college at the time that I got contacted by Cirque, and I was studying comparative religion, and which has always fascinated me, and still does, and is now a big part of my work as well. And I was coming home from a woman in Buddhism class, and I had a message on my answering machine back in the days of answering machines from Cirque du Soleil, asking if I wanted to come to Montreal tomorrow.
Wow.
I was like, oh my God, tomorrow. Well, how about next week?
Montreal. And that was your first. So were you already doing silks then, or did silks happen while you were with Cirque du Soleil?
Yeah, so silks, as we know them now, did not exist back then. I had learned in my stints at SeaWorld over the summers, there was some aerial acrobats in that show. And they asked me if I wanted to learn cordelice, or actually, they never called it cordelice. They called it Spanish web. Cordelice is what Cirque du Soleil calls it. It's in the French word. But they call it Spanish web in the States and in the English world. And basically, it's a rope that you climb up and you stick your hand or your foot in a loop and you get spun around. And so I learned how to do it then. And that was even more attractive to Cirque because they were looking for somebody who could be in what they call house troupe. So house troupe is where you kind of had multiple jobs within the show. We were kind of like the backbone of the show, where we were always in the show and taking cues and had a couple of members, and they were looking for somebody for that, and also for their skipping rope number. And I was a rope specialist because of all my experience as a rhythmic gymnast. So I did a solo with my rope in the show, and then because I had some experience with Spanish web, that also made me attractive to them. And basically the next week after that phone call, they invited me up to Montreal. I went to Montreal with a suitcase, thinking I was just going to be there for a week to kind of see if it was the right fit for me, for them to see if it was the right fit for them. And I never left. I stayed. Well, I didn't leave for a few years. I did eventually leave, but I went on tour. I wound up going on tour, taking a contract with them and going on tour, and had friends box up my stuff in Amherst College, which is where I was studying comparative religion. And
that was it. Yeah. And you were with them for how many years, Cirque du Soleil?
With that production of Quidam, it was over 3 years, somewhere in the vicinity of 3.5 years or so.
And I think, so you were studying comparative religion, and then the Cirque du Soleil thing came up, and obviously that was a no-brainer. You were just doing it. It was not even a question that you were going to go and do that.
Well, it wasn't, but it became so once I was there.
Okay.
It was another dimension that opened up. And once I saw what that world was, I was like, I knew my soul said, this is your vocation.
Yeah,
anyway,
and
I didn't mean to interrupt your question.
And I think it's important to realize, like, this Cirque du Soleil is grueling, right? Can you explain the process of putting together a show in Cirque du Soleil? Because
well, I can explain what it was like back then, because that was my experience. But basically, there was a whole year of creation before the show premiered. And then there was a sort of softer premiere, and then there was a bigger premiere later. And the it was considered to be sort of a softer premiere when we were in Montreal. And then the sort of bigger, and we had a few months between Montreal, Quebec City, and Toronto. And then when we came to the States, that was considered our US premiere. And they made the majority of their money in the US. So that's why that was considered like a second premiere. And it was, and back then, we premiered in Santa Monica. And we stayed there for a while. I mean, we came back twice. We came back and, we were there twice. It was just a really popular thing in Santa Monica. And it was a homecoming for me. And it felt really good to be able to know that my hometown and my part of, corner of the planet that I grew up in had such love, reverence, and support for that company and for a company that I was in. And to be received by family and friends in the ocean, because we were performing on the ocean. They're right on the pier in Santa Monica. It felt like a true merging of dimensions, a merging of worlds.
Yeah. And how many hours a day were you practicing when you were rehearsing?
Well, so we did the full a year of creation, and that was pretty incredible. I can get into that a little bit, but we were training from 9 to 5. That was a normal training day. But because I kind of arrived a little late to the project, and they also had hired me to perform in something that I was not an expert in. I was an expert with rope, but they asked me if I wanted to also do the Cordelis routine, the act, the rope act, and so I said yes, I'll try it. But I at the time I couldn't do a pull-up. It's not a skill that you had to develop as a rhythmic gymnast. So everybody would go home, I would have dinner, and then I'd train again from 6 to 10. So it was 9 to 5 training, and then 6 to 10. And I was actually used to that kind of training. That was very similar to the kind of hours I put in as a gymnast, which was our practices began at 6 in the morning as a gymnast, and then I wasn't done with my workday until 10 p.m. So 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day, and in between trainings, I would fit in school.
Yeah. I mean, it just shows, though, that if you want to do something really unreasonable or something completely unique, if you have something that you want to achieve, a lot of the times, it's not just luck, it's talent, but it's also the amount of hard work that you have to do sometimes to get to that point. It's not in everything in life, but in this specifically, and many times with performing artists, the amount of work that you have to put in before the show is pretty insane, It
is. And I think that, it's that's always been my experience, and that's how I understand performance is the performance itself is the tip of the iceberg. And underneath that you have the hours and hours and hours and lifetime of training and experience. And as one of my daughters puts it, she says the performance is the reward for all the hard work.
So true. I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's true. And so now you've been with Cirque du Soleil for many years. What did you then move into after Cirque du Soleil?
So I followed my heart. The tour was moving on to Europe, and they wanted me to renew my contract, and I was definitely interested in that. But I had fallen in love, and the man that I had fallen in love with had moved to Los Angeles. And so I was called once again back to my motherland. and came back here and we moved into a home together in Topanga Canyon. Um, and I'm glad we did, because we're still together and have kids and have built our own little, world together here.
Yeah, you've built a beautiful world together, by the way. So you are still a performer to this day. Like you've done some incredible things. I know a few years ago you did the opening show for the Burning Man.
Oh yes, yeah. For the first ritual,
Yes.
that we did a performance with the man, and we actually had the man give birth. So it was just a way to question, inquire around, push against, redefine boundary around gender, and with this iconic figure of that it is called a man and does look like the depiction of a man that we see on every door of every bathroom in the world.
Yeah.
But for burners, those are the people who go to Burning Man, has always been talked about, or often been talked about and thought about as not necessarily gendered, but also clearly gendered. So it was, and this was the inception of this idea came from Melissa Barron, who I call Sin. That's her playa name. And she approached me about this concept, and it was a collaboration between she and Larry Harvey, who is the founder of Burning Man. And she asked me if I would be involved in the project, and I wound up writing, directing, and choreographing production based on the art of the sculpture and the art of the sculptural pieces around the inside of what at that time was the Temple of the Man.
Yeah, it was beautiful. The video is just phenomenal. I remember watching it. It's so beautiful. It's a beautiful piece of choreography. I just love how you brought in your aerial art skills, because they look just gorgeous. The red.
Thank you. The red, yeah. That the blood. Blood, and then the pooling of the blood out from underneath the man as the man gave birth out into the rest of the playa, which felt like it was the sort of the DNA that was being spread out into next generations of playas, that would come. Once again, that sort of idea of multidimensionality and time being cyclical and not linear, and the same sort of like touching down of what happens in that land every year, and how what we did then ripples out to the past of what was done there, and in the future of what will be done there, and that is all really happening all in the same moment. But yeah, it was the hardest production probably I'd ever done. It was just so crazy complicated to try to put on a production of that level in the middle of the desert with no communication.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I mean, talking about unreasonable, it was probably one of the most unreasonable things I've ever done in my life. And somehow, and even up until the show, like all the tech failed, and I'm there, and I wasn't even supposed to perform, and one of the dancers had to get air vac'd out because she got really sick, and so here I am, hadn't slept for 48 hours, and was like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing her part, and got into the costume and got wrapped up into the sculptures that we created, was the beginning of the piece. And the stage manager came up to me and said, "We have no sound." And he said, "What do you want to do? Should we cancel the show?" And I said, "We are doing this fucking show no matter what."
Yeah. And you did it.
And soon after somebody came in who understood the issue, fixed the issue. We had sound, and we did it.
And it worked beautifully.
It was a true giving birth.
So I think the thing that I love is that you started, the creativity, that multidimensional way of thinking, this intense creativity that you've always had. You've taken it through these grueling careers as a gymnast, and then in Cirque Du Soleil, more creative, but still very grueling. But as you've evolved as a human being, your creativity has just expanded. And I think, there's this thing about people believing that, oh, I'm a gymnast and then my career is over, or I'm a dancer and I'm going to there's always like a time limit to performing artists, especially dancers and aerial artists and that. And you have really you just are not even, you're not giving into that idea at all, because what I've seen you do in your career is you are just growing, and you're taking everything that you've learned, all the wisdom that you've learned, all the experience, and you're just growing into something even bigger. And so what is it that you feel has made you not give in to that belief that you've got a timestamp, you've got a time limit?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure again, but I think it comes back to that idea of drive and vocation. And it's been very tempting for me many times over, my, through the decades to say, okay, I'm done with this, but it never feels right. It never feels like it's myself. There's always some impulse to create, even during COVID and how devastating that was for the performing arts, and continues to be. I channeled that into a different form of creativity, and I created a series called Lunar Yoga, which is a online sort of embodiment experience where I relate to the moon cycles and how the moon is in relation to our planet and the other planets, basically, based on astrology, and how the reflection of that imprints onto our personal experiences of life, but in an embodied way. So I'll look at mythology, art, music, and philosophy, yogic philosophy, and we'll do sort of a lot of chatting about that and presentation around that, and then pull those and tarot, and then which is very much about archetype and symbology and history and whatnot, and art, and then pull that into an embodied experience through the body, and it's in the frame and context of yoga, but me being who I am as an artist and also as an athlete, I pull a lot of artistic references in, and a lot of references from all of the physical therapy I've had to do, and maintenance that I've had to do to keep my body in a shape that can still perform aerial acrobatics at my age, and continue to express itself. And it's all evolution. I mean, I get really pissed off with ageism, and I think it's bullshit. I think that one of my favorite people to watch on stage would be a dancer who is in their 70s or 80s. I just think it's such an informed body. There's so much experience in there. And it's really about a deeper listening as an audience member to be able to see the layers and layers of story within those movements that frankly a 20-year-old doesn't have. I mean, certainly somebody in their early 20s or mid 20s or early 30s or whatever, it's not like they have nothing to say. Of course, everybody has something to say, and we all are expressing who we are in that moment, and that is the kaleidoscope of being an artist and how wonderful it is. But it doesn't mean it has to stop when I get to a certain age, and And it, for me, it always just has felt like it's the right choice to continue. And right now, for example, I'm doing a lot of work with a ballet company that I started working with in 2008. It's called Luminario Ballet. And I've created quite a few pieces for this company. We have a gala coming up in October this year at the Avalon, October 22nd at the
Nice.
Avalon. And I'm using the resources from my career to sort of funnel into the acts that I'm going to be choreographing for this number. I mean, for this particular production, and it is a fundraiser. So it feels like one of those things where you have that combination of giving towards something that you believe in and love with your heart, and at the same time creating art. And that merging has always felt really, really important to me. That idea of service and art. Those two things together are, I think, sort of golden.
So do you see yourself? Do you see yourself performing for as long as you can? I mean, and you're obviously going to choreograph until literally the day you die, but actually performing, do you see yourself doing that until your body says no?
There's already, I think it's all about, it's again like that. I'm going to reference this, the metaphor of being like a kaleidoscope. It's like, there are certain things I can't do now that I used to do in my early 20s, and certain things that I couldn't do in my early 20s that I can do now. And I just find that really compelling to see artists personally. I mean, if other people find it compelling, I hope so. But I personally find it really compelling to see over the trajectory of an artist's career, and musicians too. Like, I love to see, for example, one of my favorite artists is Tori Amos, and I love to see what she did with Little Earthquakes back in the 90s. And I love to see what she's doing now. I went to go see her at the Greek, and I just feel like, wow, she could never have done that in the 90s.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. There's just something about somebody growing into who they are as a performer, as an artist, and it does take time, and it takes the experiences that but you can hear it. You can hear it in the voices. Like when somebody's singing, you can hear it when somebody's performing. There is something very different about their way they move their body. And even if they can't do the things, certain technical things, the way they do the other things are just, there's something so embodied about it. And it's like only years and years and years of life can really bring that out of you. So I do. I really hope that this whole ageism thing is starting to fall away, because I think there was a time when it was such a thing, but now I think it is starting to fall away. I think that people are really realizing the value of somebody who has experience, which is something you cannot have without the years, so let's hope that's what it is. But
let's hope that's what it is.
Yeah. But I think we have run out of time, even though I'd love to speak to you any further. I just want to say that I love how your life trajectory has been completely up to you. You have really, really set yourself on your path, and you've done it with a lot of grit, a lot of the time. It takes a lot to be at the level that you have been in your life. And I've just learned so much from you as an artist. When I once worked with you and saw how you've just got this amazing organic way of creating, that's something that cannot be taught. That is something that's really, you were really born with. And it's just been beautiful to watch, you as an artist. And I can't wait to see what you do next. I really can't wait to see how it all evolves.
Oh, Devin, thank you. And that it makes me feel a little shy, but I thank you for those words. But I also want to say too, for especially any artists who are listening, there has been a lot of doubt, and there has been a lot of, a lot of unknown. And there's that place of thinking, what am I doing? Why am I still doing this? I mean, I don't want anybody to walk away from this conversation who might, be an artist or be in a similar place that I've been, and think, oh wow, well, I guess it must be nice for her. But because really, it hasn't been easy, and it's been a reinvention every fucking time, and my feeling towards myself around that has always been just try to be as forgiving with my mistakes as I can be, and learn from them, and then just continue to move forward through the doubt, through the lack of security or being sure about anything, and just keep looking inside and finding that place where that is the source, that we can only find when we do that, looking deeply inside, into those inner dimensions.
Thank you. I love that. Okay, I'm going to finish off our conversation with my 3 unreasonable questions.
Sure.
Bianca, what is the most courageous thing you have ever done?
The most courageous. Ooh, that's a tough one, Erica. I think it's that, if I can just say that it's that every time going out and putting myself out there into something new and not knowing how it will land for an audience, whether that audience is a yoga class that I'm leading, or an aerial class that I'm leading, or whether it is a performance, on a televised performance. It's just that constantly stepping into the unknown. I think that's what courage has been in my career.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, my second question: who is one of your favorite unreasonable humans, and why?
Well, I want to say you.
No, you can't do that.
And I can list all the reasons. So, oh gosh, there's so many that come into mind. I feel like my husband is really an unreasonable person, and
I agree.
And I think a lot of spouses would think that way, but I also mean that in the way that you mean it.
Yeah.
Like sort of the risk taking or stepping into the unknown is, at least that's how I interpret unreasonable, how you mean it. This is a man that has inspired me, an artist who has inspired me quite, literally on such a personal level, over so many years, as somebody who takes such risk and to follow his heart, regardless of what anybody else might think or what might be the reasonable thing to do. And so, yeah, Robin Fink, my husband.
Love that. Okay, my last question. You touched on it. What is your definition of an unreasonable human?
Yes, that is a good question. I think an unreasonable human, in this context, is somebody who is willing to do something and follow their heart and follow their calling, and do the work of, first of all, looking inside to figure out what that is, because sometimes that's the hardest thing. And maybe that's what it is. And maybe that is the seed of the unreasonable human, is somebody who is willing to quiet the noise of the world of expectation around oneself, and find that voice that is unique to oneself, and then use that voice.
I love that. Yes.
Yes.
Yes to all of it. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you so much. I've loved this conversation.
This has been so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
I love you.
Awesome to be here. It's been really fun. Thank you.
Thank you. I love you. I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Unreasonable Humans. Thanks so much for joining me. Please follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and remember that a great rating goes a very long way to support the show. Until the next one, bye.